Chance alcoholic. Um, wasn't really expecting to speak, but here we are. Um, my name is Chance. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is June 13th of 2013. I identify as an alcoholic because whenever I drink for the effect. I don't know what's going to happen when I drink. And when I'm not drinking, I obsess over alcohol, or I crave alcohol, or I'm doing whatever I can to get alcohol. And even when I was doing drugs before I got sober, I was still thinking about drinking while I was doing drugs. And so for me, I identify as an alcoholic not because of the amount I drank, it's what happens when I drink. And that was a very important indicator for me. Because we have 20 minutes, I'm going to give you the short version of before I got sober. I am Russian on my dad's side and Severn on my mom's side. My parents met in the Navy, got married in 3 weeks, still married today. Both sides of my family, a lot of trauma, a lot of bad stuff. Both my parents were as loving as they could have been to me. And growing up, I had everything I needed. I grew up in a military family. I moved once a year for most of my life, apart from a 9-year gap when I was a little bit older. I don't know what the word home means even today. I never had the experience of settling down. I never had the experience of having a community. I don't know that mindset, and I still don't today. And when I was growing up, at least the first half of my childhood, like it was okay, all things considered. And what happened for me was at a very young age, I didn't quite feel like I belonged here. My name is Chance because my parents did not expect to have me. My mom had health problems and surgeries that made it impossible for them to have a second kid. And then I was born anyway, a year later. I was born very sick, very premature. I was in a hospital the first 2 years of my life. I had severe speech problems, severe motor skill problems. I had a hard time talking. I had a hard time learning when I was very little. And I almost died several times before, I learned how to walk. This first 12 years of my life, I was bullied on a regular basis. I always felt like an outcast. My only conception of religion and God is that my people's parents told them other people not to hang out with me because I didn't go to church when I was 10, or 9 or 8 years old. But that doesn't make me an alcoholic because there were several people I went to school with that had the same problems and it turned out fine. What happened for me though is I kept trying to find solutions to feel okay. For me, I started acting out small things here and there. And by the time I was 11 or 12, I just had this weird, hopeless feeling I couldn't quite explain, right? Because, there was some stuff going on in my family, but for the most part, when I was 11 or 12, things were okay. But I wasn't. And I just had this idea that I wasn't meant to be here. And so I had my first suicide attempt when I was 12 years old. I had my first overdose. And, long story short, for me, like I just could not live in this planet. And for 2 years, I was in and out of psych wards. I was constantly trying to find ways to harm myself. And, I got to a point where I'd realized that, I didn't necessarily want to die anymore, but I didn't want to live. And I was, at 13, 14 years old, finding ways that I could live with myself and function as a human being. And so I have this journey where I try everything you can think of. Meanwhile, I'm at least on the outside trying to pretend everything's okay. And long story short, I found alcohol. And I had my first drink. I don't really remember, honestly. Probably 12 or 13. But the first drink I do remember was 14. And I remember the way that it tasted. It was a Red Stripes beer. I had just gotten back from Jamaica. It was terrible. It was warm. And I was all I had. I couldn't have anything else. So I couldn't get drunk, but I knew I wanted that feeling, and I felt okay very briefly. And looking back now, there was periods of time before that point where I had drinks and I had had that feeling in retrospect. But this was the first time that I really wanted to get drunk and I couldn't. And eventually, I discover more alcohol and I get drunk for the first time. And my experience with alcohol, my first drunk ever, I was a nerd. I was a goody two shoes. So of course I looked up on the internet exactly how much whiskey it would take to get me drunk, like how much it would take me to get a certain BAC content. And then I took measuring cups from my parents' kitchen, and I took the bottle of whiskey and I took it to my room and I measured out the exact amount of alcohol to get drunk. And then I drank more. And so the first time I ever got drunk, I could not control my drinking. I drank more than I intended to because I couldn't have enough. And, I never drank socially. I was the kid that when I was healthy, I was an honor roll student. I didn't fit in with that crowd. I was not the guy that did drugs, publicly at least. Um, but I love the feeling of getting drunk. And what happened for me was when I got drunk, I didn't think about killing myself. I didn't think about taking on the responsibility of, my dad having a stroke and being the man of the family at 13 and having to deal with all the after effects of what happened with my parents and after effects of the recession and all the stuff that started happening when I was a teenager. And for me, it worked until it didn't. And that was the case for pretty much every single thing in my life. Fast forward, I'm 16, 17 years old. And, I'm at this point where, uh, you know, every solution stops working. I can't be an honor roll student because my brain isn't working and I start failing out of school. I can't be a cross country athlete because I can't run because I'm too high. And I start injuring myself. I start running out of loopholes. I can think my way through everything. My dad had an IQ of 164. My mom had an IQ of 140. I come from a very smart family, and I was raised with the idea that I could think my way through everything. I could figure things out, and for whatever reason, I could not figure out alcoholism at all. I just couldn't figure it out, and it baffled me. It really did, and I got to a point where you know I knew that I had to do something. And so I checked myself into rehab, when I'm 16 years old, thinking that if I detox off of some of the hard drugs, and I detox off the alcohol, I could be a normal drinker at 21 eventually. I just needed to be good for a few years. And I relapsed in rehab. I had a terrible rehab experience. Nothing convinced me in rehab that I should go to AA, except for the fact that I was introduced to AA. And I went to AA out of spite, to keep things general, after that terrible experience in rehab. And what I discovered in AA was that there are other people like me. I started going to AA in a town of Bloomington, Illinois. People were talking about their second homes. They lost their 401k in the recession. Their 15-year-old daughter was having problems. They broke their nails in the morning. Like they're worried about their 50th birthday. And I'm 16, and I have no idea what the hell you guys are talking about. But then there was a couple young people that were talking about how they couldn't stop drinking, and they thought about killing themselves, and they drank so they didn't have to kill themselves. And I started related to the feelings. But I also got to a point where I was hopeless. I didn't really think AA could work for me. Frankly, I didn't think I could get sober at all, regardless of the solution. And after about 4 months, in April of 2013, I get to this point where, I read an article online about hand sanitizer and how crazy teenagers were making their own alcohol from hand sanitizer. And I thought, that's insane. Let me try that. And I did. And I made my own alcohol at 16. And I got drunk, and it was terrible. And I blacked out, and I called my sponsor for 2 hours. I remember 5 minutes of that conversation, but I felt relief. And what happened for me was the last 2 months before I got sober was utter hell. From that point forward, I lost complete control, and I lost all hope I could get sober. And I was going to meetings, but every day I was a little bit weaker. And people were praying for me, but I got to the point where I couldn't talk anymore. I couldn't hold a coffee cup. I was shaking. I had pale skin. At 17, I was dying, literally. And people were talking about how, oh, well, it's a good thing you got sober so young because you're missing out on the 10, 15 years of misery. And here I am at 17, like dying, having that misery now. And I was wondering how the hell you could make it that far because I was done. But I also, again, didn't think I could get sober. And What happened for me was pure luck. Like I wasn't intending to get sober. My plan was to kill myself because I knew I couldn't be sober, but I knew I couldn't not be sober. And I didn't want to play out what I knew was going to happen. Because alcoholism ran in my dad's side of the family. We're all Russian. I knew what was going to happen to me one way or another. And so I tried to kill myself and I survive. Then I wake up the next day, I hallucinate for a few days, and then I go to a meeting and I'm angry, but I'm there. And I stay in the meeting for 15 minutes and I walk out. I don't remember a single thing that happened in that meeting other than what happened afterwards, which is that people walked out that were my age, asked me how I was doing, and I told the truth. And it upset me. And, what happened for me was, I've been sober ever since. And I wish I could tell you that in my 8 years of sobriety that I am become this angelic being and I've never made any mistakes and I just found a higher power and like everything worked out great. And that wasn't the case for me. What happened for me was I have fought tooth and nail every year of my sobriety. I am terrible at direction. I only worked the steps because it was the only thing I had left. And for whatever reason it worked. I lost the obsession to drink. I can also tell you the first couple of years of sobriety, I did not want to be here. Every single thing that could have happened that could have deterred me from staying sober happened. I got taken advantage of. I got raped. I got homeless. I got all these things that happen to alcoholics who are not sober, happen to me sober. And I had to separate the people of Alcoholics Anonymous that were harming me and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was a tough thing to do. And what I found was that I still wanted to stay sober more than I wanted to drink. And I also found that I needed to seek therapy because if I try to solve all my problems with AA, I was going to die and I was going to take people with me. And I almost did, for several years. There were several years in Alcoholics Anonymous where I was not treated and I caused a lot of harm, whether I wanted to admit it or not. And eventually I got to a point where I had to have a second spiritual awakening, which was seeking outside help. And I got outside help. And, I got to a point where, I recognized that I had to surrender again. And so, throughout my sobriety, I have these geographics. I move from place to place because I don't know who I am. I don't know what home is. I have no idea what I'm doing. Eventually I get the stuff back. I learn how to be employable. I learn how to get the job. I learn how to get the relationship. I learn how to get the money. I learn how to get what I want. I learn how to get what I think I need. And it's never enough for me if I'm not in a spiritual state of mind. And the last few years have been tough because my ego has been smashed, and I've had to rebuild time and time again for my own mistakes that I've made. And now I'm at a place where I recognize that it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to not be okay. I can also tell you that I'm 25 years old. I entered AA at 16. I did not expect to make it this far. I was thinking maybe 17, maybe 18. I was not expecting to be a full adult, let alone have a career and have the stuff and have ambitions and have a drive. And my brain came back. I got my intelligence back. That was a mistake, but it's there. I think way too much. And I still make mistakes. This year I've made a lot of mistakes. I've stepped away from AA. I'm going to school full time. I'm working full time, and I've made a lot of mistakes. And I'm very flawed right now, and it's very vulnerable. But I'm here. And I think the main thing I can say for me in my sobriety is I stayed put. I stayed sober. Everything else has changed. Every single aspect of my life has changed. I can tell you that I'm not the person I used to be. I'm not the partner I used to be. I'm not the son I used to be. I'm not the friend I used to be. And I'm still not where I want to be. But surrendering to something that wasn't me, that was important. Admitting that I couldn't do this on my own, whether that was God or it was simply asking for help. Because the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous was my higher power for a long time. But I had to admit that I had to seek help somewhere. And then I had to identify what AA could help with and what AA couldn't help with. And then I had to take action. And then I had to take more action. And that's been my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous and in my life. I still got a lot of work to do. But the difference today is that I know it's going to be okay. My ego is going to be smashed. I know I'm not always going to be liked by everyone. I know that I'm not always going to meet my own unrealistic expectations, but I do know I'm going to be okay. And I think when I've started to realize that, my life hasn't gotten easier, but I've become okay with what my life is today. And it's pretty fucking great. I'm not going to lie. There's bad days and there's good days, but my life is way better than I could have ever hoped. But grateful to be here. If you think you're too young to get sober, shut up. You're not too young. I was 16. There's a lot of us that got sober as teenagers. You're never too young. They're only, and you're not too old either. As long as you're still alive, you have a shot. That's what I was always told. And I think the most important thing, I'll end with this. When I remember going to a meeting when I was new and I was sharing for 15 minutes about something, and I said I was 10 days sober. And someone walked up to me after a meeting and told me to hang on to those 10 days. And that was the only piece of advice I followed that year, to the T. And I've been sober ever since. So if there's anything you can take from this, hang on to those 10 days, hang on to those days, and everything else will work out one way or another. But that's all I got. Thanks.